Vance stood in the back of the auction hall with exactly 7 credits in her account. That was all she had left in the universe. 7 credits would buy her maybe 2 meals at the station cafeteria or 1 night in the cheapest sleeping pod. It would not buy her a way off Theta 9, where she had been stuck for almost a month. Her old ship, a cargo freighter called the Minnow, had died in the station's docking bay 3 weeks ago. The engine had finally given up after years of patches and repairs. The station master had given her 48 hours to clear out her belongings before they recycled the hull for scrap metal. She had taken her clothes, her few personal items, and the small amount of money the scrap dealer paid her. Then she had wandered the station corridors, trying to figure out what to do next. A cargo hauler without a ship was nothing. She had no family to call for help, no friends with spare credits to lend. The job boards were full of positions that required experience she did not have or certifications she could not afford. She was 32 years old alone and running out of options. That was why she had come to the Galactic surplus auction. She did not really expect to buy anything. She just wanted to look at ships one more time before she accepted that her life among the stars was over. Maybe she would find work on the station. Cleaning crews were always hearing. It was not the life she wanted, but it was a life. The auction hall was a large room filled with beings from a dozen different species. Merchants with their blue skin and calculating eyes. Traders wrapped in flowing robes. A group of salvage operators, their scaled bodies hunched over as they calculated profit margins. And scattered among them, a few humans-like, mostly looking just as desperate as she felt. The auctioneer was a Tellurian, a species known for their 4 arms and their complete lack of enthusiasm for anything. He stood at the front of the room, reading from a list in a voice that suggested he would rather be anywhere else. Lot 45, he droned. Colony transport make hull breach in cargo section 3. Opening bid 12,000 credits. A merchant raised a paddle. Someone else countered, watched without really seeing. 12,000 credits might as well have been 12 million. She had 7. The lots continued. Mining barges with failing life support. Shuttles with cracked viewports. A luxury yacht that had been impounded for smuggling and still had contraband hidden in the walls. Each one sold for thousands of credits to buyers who had thousands of credits to spend. Then the auctioneer reached Lot 47, and something changed. Lot 47, he said, and for the first time there was something in his voice that might have been discomfort. Terranera vessel, Valkyrie-class battle cruiser, designation, forlorn hope, condition unknown. Buyer assumes all risk and liability. All sales final, no refunds, no complaints. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the ship, and heard several people in the room inhale sharply. The forlorn hope looked like it had been through hell and only barely made it out the other side. Scorch marks covered the hull in sweeping patterns that spoke of plasma fire and explosions. The port nacelle was completely missing, torn away at the base. Holes gaped in the armor plating, revealing corridors that had clearly been exposed to the vacuum of space. The bridge windows were shattered. One of the weapon turrets hung at an angle that suggested it might fall off at any moment. But it was not just the damage that made people uncomfortable. Could see it in their faces, the way they shifted and looked away. She knew what ship this was. Everyone knew. The Battle of Reach, 40 years ago. The last stand of the Terran Defense Fleet against the Hegemony Armada. Earth was already gone by then, burned and broken, but the survivors had gathered what ships they could and made a final desperate attempt to escape. The Hegemony had sent 50 warships to stop them. The Terrans had sent 12. None of them had come back. That was the official story. The Hegemony had declared humanity defeated, scattered, no longer a threat. The few humans who survived did so by hiding, by pretending to be less than they were, by forgetting they had ever been a spacefaring civilization. The forlorn hope had been presumed destroyed at its reach. 3,000 humans had served on that ship. 3,000 humans had died. And now here it was, being sold for scrap. Opening bid, the auctioneer said, 7 credits. The room was silent. The merchants looked at each other and shook their heads. The salvage operators calculated the cost of towing a wreck that size and decided it was not worth the effort. They wanted nothing to do with a ship that had so much death attached to it. 7 credits. The auctioneer was practically giving it away, and no one wanted it. Raised her hand. She did not really know why she did it. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the fact that 7 credits was all she had, and this was the only thing in the universe she could afford. Maybe it was something else entirely, something she would not understand until much later. 7 credits, the auctioneer said, pointing at her. Do I hear 8? Silence. 7 credits going once, going twice. He paused, almost hopefully, but no one moved. Sold to the human in the back. Congratulations, I suppose. The paperwork took longer than the auction itself. Signed document after document, each one reminding her that she was buying a ship with no warranty, no guarantee, and no expectation that it would ever fly again. The station master handed her with the docking coordinates and wished her luck in a tone that suggested she would need it. Bay 17 was at the far end of the station, in a section that had clearly not been well maintained. The lights flickered. The air recyclers hummed with an unhealthy rattle, and when finally stepped through the airlock and looked up at her new ship, she understood why no one else had bid. The forlorn hope was even worse in person. The hologram had not shown the details. The streaks of carbon scoring that suggested fires had burned for hours, the twisted metal around the engine housing, the dark stains on the hull that might have been coolant or might have been something else entirely. Up close, the ship did not look damaged. It looked dead. It looked like a corpse floating in the void. Stood there for a long time, staring. What had she done? She had spent her last 7 credits on a tomb. She could not fly this thing. She could not even sell it for parts without spending money she did not have on salvage equipment. She almost walked away. She almost turned around and left the bay and tried to forget she had ever been stupid enough to buy a ghost ship with her last credits. But something stopped her. She was not sure what it was. A feeling. A whisper of something that might have been hope, or might have been stubbornness, or might have been the simple fact that she had nothing left to lose. Whatever it was, it made her walk toward the ship instead of away from it. There was a breach in the cargo bay large enough to climb through. Pulled herself up and squeezed inside, dropping down into a corridor that had not seen a living being in 40 years. And then something impossible happened. The emergency lights flickered on. Red illumination spread down the corridor, casting long shadows against the walls. The lights were dim and unsteady, but they were working. That should not have been possible. The reactor should have been dead for decades. There should have been no power at all. Stood very still, her heart pounding. The air was cold but breathable, also impossible. The life support should have failed years ago. Even if some pocket of atmosphere had remained, it should have gone stale long before now. She walked slowly down the corridor, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The walls were scorched in places, marked by weapons fire. She passed a door that had been welded shut, and she did not try to open it. She passed a viewport that looked out at the docking bay, cracked but intact. And then she saw the words painted on the bulkhead. Per ad. She knew that phrase. It was old, older than space travel, from a time when humanity had still been bound to a single planet, through hardship to the stars. Her grandmother used to say it, back when was a child, back before her grandmother had passed away on some forgotten station in the outer systems. Kept walking. The ship was a maze of corridors and compartments, many of them damaged beyond recognition. But something guided her steps, some instinct she did not understand, and eventually she found herself standing in front of a door marked Primary AI Core. The door was sealed with armor plating that had folded around it like a cocoon, protecting whatever was inside from the battle that had raged through the rest of the ship. Touched the plating, expecting it to be cold and dead like everything else. It was warm. The plating retracted at her touch, sliding back into the walls with a soft hiss. The door behind it opened, revealing a small room filled with equipment she did not recognize. In the center of the room was a console, and on the console was a single blinking light. Reached out and touched it. "Crew complement detected," a voice said. It was scratchy and distorted like a recording played through damaged speakers, but it was unmistakably a voice. "One human, female. Biometrics do not match any registered crew member. Identity unknown." His breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" "I am Aegis," the voice replied. "Autonomous Emergency Guardian and Intelligence System. I am the primary AI of the Terran Defense Fleet vessel Forlorn Hope." A pause. "It has been a long time since anyone spoke to me." "How long?" 41 years, 7 months, and 12 days since the Battle of Reach. I have been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Another pause, longer this time. When the AI spoke again, there was something in its voice that might have been hope. "Waiting for a captain. Welcome aboard, Captain Vance. I am pleased to finally meet you." Stood in the dim red light of the AI core, surrounded by 40 years of silence and secrets, and she realized that her 7 credits had bought her something much stranger than a broken ship. She just did not know what it was yet. The first week was the hardest. Lived inside the Forlorn Hope, sleeping in a crew quarters that Aegis had somehow kept pressurized and heated. The AI apologized for the accommodations. The captain's quarters were in a section of the ship that had been breached during the battle, and repairing them would take time and materials they did not have. Told Aegis that the crew quarters were fine. They were better than the sleeping pod she could no longer afford on the station. They were better than nothing. The ship was in terrible condition, but Aegis knew every damaged system and every broken component. The AI walked her through the vessel section by section, pointing out what needed to be fixed and what could wait. The list was overwhelming. Hull breaches, damaged power conduits, life support systems running on backup reserves, weapons offline, engines dead, shields non-existent. "The Forlorn Hope cannot fly in her current state," Aegis explained. "Extensive repairs are required. However, I have identified several salvage sources within this system that may provide the necessary components." Shook her head. "I have no money, I have no equipment, I cannot afford to hire repair crews or buy parts." "Then we will do it ourselves." She thought the AI was joking at first, but Aegis was not joking. Over the next several days, the AI directed her to decommission ships in the station's salvage yards, vessels that had been stripped and abandoned and forgotten. No one wanted Terran-era parts anymore. The technology was outdated by galactic standards, 40 years behind the cutting edge. The salvage dealers practically gave the stuff away. Spent her days crawling through junked ships, pulling components that Aegis identified as compatible. Power couplings, atmospheric processors, hull plating that could be cut and welded to cover the breaches. The work was exhausting and dirty and often dangerous. She came back to the Forlorn Hope each night covered in grease and dust, her muscles aching, her hands blistered. But the ship began to change. The hull breaches closed one by one, sealed with salvaged plating that Aegis guided her to install. The power system stabilized as she replaced damaged conduits. The life support came back online properly, and the air grew warmer and cleaner. And when was too tired to work anymore, when she fell asleep in her quarters without even eating dinner, the ship's maintenance drones emerged from their storage bays and continued the repairs through the night. The drones were another surprise. Aegis had kept them functional all these years, running on minimal power, waiting for the day when they would be needed again. They were old and battered, but they worked. They followed instructions and Aegis's guidance, welding and cutting and repairing while she slept. By the end of the second week, the forlorn hope was no longer a corpse. It was still damaged, still far from battle-ready. But it was alive. "Aegis," said one night, sitting in the AI core with a cup of ration tea warming her hands. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, Captain." She still was not used to that title. "Why did you survive? The battle was 40 years ago. Everyone said all the Terran ships were destroyed." The AI was silent for a long moment. "The Battle of Reach was not a random engagement," Aegis said finally. "We were protecting something. A convoy of civilian ships carrying refugees and supplies. The hegemony wanted to capture them. We could not allow that." "What happened to the convoy?" "They escaped. The Forlorn Hope and the other warships held the line long enough for the convoy to reach their jump point. But the cost was high. By the end, only this ship remained and we were badly damaged. Captain knew we could not escape through normal means, so she ordered me to play dead." Frowned. "Play dead." "I simulated a reactor meltdown. I vented plasma from the engineering section to create the appearance of a fatal explosion. I shut down all active systems and drifted into the debris field. The hegemony scanned us and concluded we were destroyed. They moved on, and I waited." "For 40 years?" "Yes." Captain recorded a set of final orders before she died. "I was to wait until a human came to claim the ship. I was to protect the information I carry until someone could use it. I was to survive." Set down her tea. "What information?" Aegis hesitated again. "I am sorry, Captain. Certain files are encrypted beyond my ability to access. They require biometric authorization from Captain, and she is no longer alive. I know that I am carrying something important, something the hegemony has spent decades searching for, but I do not know the details. The hegemony is still looking for you. They have never stopped. Scattered reports over the years have mentioned search parties in this sector, patrols scanning old debris fields, inquiries about Terran-era vessels. They believe something survived the battle. They have been trying to find it ever since." Felt a chill run down her spine. She had thought she was buying a piece of junk. Instead, she had bought a target. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I apologize, Captain. I did not wish to frighten you away. It has been a very long time since I had someone to talk to. I was afraid you would leave." There was something in the AI's voice that surprised her. Loneliness. Real, genuine loneliness. Aegis had been alone in the dark for 40 years, waiting for someone to come. And now was here, and Aegis was afraid she would abandon it. She picked up her tea again. "I am not going anywhere." "Thank you, Captain." The third week brought the first sign of trouble. Was in the salvage yard, pulling engine components from a decommissioned transport, when her communicator buzzed with an alert from Aegis. She dropped what she was doing and hurried back to the ship. "What is it?" "A hegemony patrol cruiser has entered the system," Aegis reported. "They are conducting systematic scans of all vessels in the sector. I have reduced our power signature to minimal levels, but I recommend you remain aboard until they depart." Watched through the repaired bridge windows as the patrol cruiser moved through the system. It was sleek and predatory, painted in the dark colors of the hegemony navy. Compared to the battered Forlorn Hope, it looked like a weapon waiting to be fired. The scan took 3 hours. Sat in the captain's chair, barely breathing, while Aegis monitored the patrol's progress. The cruiser passed close to their docking bay, close enough that could see the weapon turrets tracking back and forth. But the ship did not stop. The Forlorn Hope, dormant and dark, apparently did not register as anything more than another piece of salvage. Eventually, the cruiser moved on. "They are leaving," Aegis announced. "The system is clear." Let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. That was close. "Yes, I recommend we accelerate our repair schedule. The longer we remain here, the greater the chance of detection." Nodded. She had been working as fast as she could, but it was not fast enough. She needed help. The next day, she did something she had never done before. She posted a message on the station's job board, offering work to any humans willing to do physical labor for minimal pay. She did not expect much response. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and most of them had learned to keep their heads down. But 3 people showed up at the docking bay the following morning. The first was an older man named, a former engineer who had worked on Terran ships before the war. He stared at the forlorn hope with tears in his eyes and said he had never thought he would see a Valkyrie class again. The second was a young woman named, barely 20 years old, who had grown up on the station and had never seen Earth or any of the old human colonies. She did not know much about ships, but she was strong and willing to learn. The third was a teenager named, quiet and serious, who had lost his parents to a hegemony labor camp and had been surviving on his own ever since. He did not say much, but he worked harder than anyone had ever met. Together, they threw themselves into the repairs. New things about Terran engineering that even Aegis had forgotten. Turned out to have a talent for welding. Could squeeze into spaces too small for anyone else, reconnecting wires and sealing leaks in the most inaccessible parts of the ship. The days blurred together. They worked from morning until night, pausing only to eat and sleep. The forlorn hope transformed around them. The engines came back online. The shields flickered to life for the first time in 40 years. The weapon systems powered up, showing green lights on consoles that had been dark since the battle. And then, at the end of the 4th week, Aegis made an announcement. The forlorn hope is ready for departure. All critical systems are operational. We can leave whenever you wish, Captain. Stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars beyond the viewport. Behind her, and waited for her decision. Where would we go? She asked. I have coordinates, Aegis said. A location in deep space, far beyond hegemony borders. It is where the convoy went after the battle. It is where they were supposed to build a new home. I do not know what we will find there, but I believe it is important. Thought about the hegemony patrol and the encrypted files and the 40 years of waiting. She thought about Captain, who had sacrificed everything to protect a secret. She thought about who cried when he saw the ship. She thought about and who had never known a time when humans were more than scattered refugees. Then that is where we will go, she said. The forlorn hope lifted off from Theta 9 for the first time in 4 decades, and as the station fell away behind them, felt something she had not felt in years. Hoping. But she did not know that they were already being followed. She did not know that the hegemony patrol had not left the system at all. She did not know that someone had been watching them the entire time. And she did not know that a message was being sent to Hegemony Command, reporting that the forlorn hope had been found at last. The journey was supposed to take 2 months. Had not realized how far they would need to travel. The coordinates Aegis provided were in deep space, far beyond any mapped trade routes, in a region that even the hegemony had not bothered to claim. There was nothing out there. That was the point. If you wanted to hide something, you hid it where no one would think to look. The first week passed without incident. The forlorn hope moved through hyperspace in jumps of several light years at a time, dropping out periodically to recalibrate the navigation systems. The ship handled well, considering its age and the patchwork repairs they had made. Aegis monitored every system constantly, reporting issues before they became problems. Fell into a routine. She took shifts on the bridge with, learning the controls of a warship that was very different from the cargo freighter she used to fly, and continued working on repairs, fixing the smaller issues that they had not had time to address before departure. In the evenings, they gathered in the mess hall to share meals and stories. Told them about the old days before the war when humans had controlled dozens of star systems. He described the great cities of Earth, the colony worlds, the fleet of ships that had once been the pride of humanity. He talked about his wife, who had died at Reach, and his daughter, who had been on one of the convoy ships. He had spent 40 years wondering if she had survived. Asked questions. She had grown up knowing almost nothing about human history. The hegemony had erased most of it, burned the records, taught the surviving humans that they had always been a minor species of no importance. Learning the truth was like discovering a part of herself that had been missing. Listened but rarely spoke. When he did, it was usually to ask about the war. How had the hegemony beaten humanity? Why had no one fought back? Could see the anger in him, buried deep but always present. He wanted answers that none of them could give. The trouble started in the second week. They had just completed a hyperspace jump to a system with no name, just a designation in Aegis's database, when the sensors detected another ship. "Contact," Aegis announced. "Hegemony patrol cruiser, same class as the vessel we encountered at Theta 9. They are 4 light minutes away and closing." Felt her stomach drop. How did they find us? Unknown. However, I calculate a high probability that we were tracked from our departure point. The hegemony may have been monitoring the station more closely than we realized. Move to the weapons console. What are our options? "We can run," Aegis said. "The Forlorn Hope is faster than a standard patrol cruiser in hyperspace. However, our engines are not operating at full capacity due to incomplete repairs. I estimate a 62% chance of successful escape." "And if we fight?" "The patrol cruiser is designed for pursuit and interdiction, not heavy combat. Our weapons are superior. However, we have limited ammunition and our shields are not fully calibrated. I estimate a 78% chance of victory, but significant damage is likely." Looked at the tactical display. The patrol cruiser was a bright red dot moving steadily toward them. In a few minutes, it would be in weapons range. "We run," she decided. "Plot a course for the nearest hyperspace entry point." Course plotted, engaging engines. The Forlorn Hope surged forward, its repaired engines pushing it toward the edge of the system. Behind them, the patrol cruiser accelerated to match. For several long minutes, it was a race, both ships straining toward the point where they could jump to hyperspace. The Forlorn Hope won. The hyperspace drive engaged, and the stars stretched into lines around them, and when normal space returned, they were alone. But the pattern repeated. At every relay point, every planned stop, there was another hegemony ship waiting. Sometimes it was a patrol cruiser. Sometimes it was a pair of interceptors. Once, it was a full destroyer, bristling with weapons, that forced them to take a detour of 3 days to avoid it. "They know our route," said after the 5th encounter. "They are anticipating our movements." Aegis agreed. "The hegemony has likely analyzed our trajectory and predicted our destination. They cannot know the exact coordinates, but they know roughly where we are going. They are attempting to intercept us before we arrive." "Can we change course?" asked. "Take a different path?" "We could," Aegis said, "but doing so would add several weeks to our journey and require more fuel than we currently have. We would need to stop at a station to resupply, which would increase our exposure to hegemony detection." Studied the star charts looking for options. "What if we went through the drift?" Looked at her sharply. "The drift is a dead zone. No reliable hyperspace lanes. Ships that go in there do not always come out." "Exactly. The hegemony would not expect us to risk it. And Aegis has navigational data from the old Terran fleet. Maybe we can find a safe path." Aegis processed the suggestion. "I have limited data on the drift, but it is more than any current navigation system possesses. I estimate a 41% chance of successful passage." "That is not good odds," said quietly. "No," admitted. "But the odds of getting through the hegemony blockade are getting worse every day. At least in the drift, we control our own fate." They talked it over for hours, was against it. The drift had a reputation for swallowing ships whole, was uncertain. Surprisingly, was in favor. He said he would rather take his chances with the unknown than keep running from the hegemony. In the end, made the decision. They would go through the drift. The drift was a region of space where the normal rules did not apply. Hyperspace lanes twisted and folded in on themselves. Gravity wells appeared where no stars existed. Ships had disappeared there for centuries, and no one knew why. The forlorn hope entered the drift 3 days later. The first thing noticed was the silence. Outside the ship, space looked wrong. The stars were dim and scattered, their light filtered through clouds of dust and gas that seemed to absorb everything. The navigation systems flickered and complained, struggling to make sense of a region that logic. Aegis guided them through. The AI followed pathways that were not on any modern chart, routes that the old Terran fleet had mapped decades ago. They moved slowly, carefully, jumping short distances and recalibrating constantly. Days passed, then weeks. The drift seemed endless, a maze of darkness and silence that pressed in on them from all sides. Began to understand why ships disappeared here. It was not just the navigational hazards, it was the isolation. The sense of being utterly alone, cut off from everything familiar, lost in a void that went on forever. But they were not alone. On the 12th day in the drift, Aegis detected a signal. "I am receiving a transmission," the AI announced. "It is on an old Terran frequency, one that has not been used in 40 years. Leaned forward, can you decode it?" Already done. The transmission is a repeating message. It says, "The forlorn hope flies again. Rally point confirmed." "I do not understand," said. "Who is sending that?" "I am," Aegis replied. "Or rather, I was. I transmitted this message the moment Captain Vance took command of the ship. It was part of my programming, a signal to any surviving Terran vessels that the forlorn hope had returned. And someone is responding. Multiple contacts are responding. I am detecting 17 vessels on approach, all broadcasting Terran identification codes. They have been hiding in the drift for decades, waiting for this signal." Stared at the tactical display as new contacts appeared one by one. Old ships, human ships, freighters and cruisers, and one battered carrier that she recognized from the history books. They emerged from the darkness like ghosts, ships that should not exist, crewed by people who should not have survived. And as they drew closer, realized that she was no longer leading a single damaged warship. She was leading a fleet. The next few hours were a blur of communication and coordination. The captains of the other ships introduced themselves over video link, men and women who had spent their entire lives hiding in the drift, passing down the traditions of Earth to their children, and they had been waiting for 40 years, just like Aegis, waiting for someone to come and tell them it was time. Found his daughter. She was 62 years old now, a grandmother herself, but she remembered him. They talked for hours while the fleet assembled around the forlorn hope, catching up on 4 decades of lost time. And then Aegis announced that they had reached the coordinates. Looked out the viewport and saw nothing at first, just empty space, black and featureless. But then Aegis adjusted the sensors and a shape emerged from the darkness. A station, massive, silent, hidden in the shadow of a rogue planet that wandered through the void without a star to orbit. "This is it," Aegis said. "This is where the convoy was going. This is what we have been protecting all these years." The fleet approached slowly, reverently. The station's lights were dark, but its systems responded to their signals. Docking bays opened. Navigation beacons activated. And as the forlorn hope entered the largest bay, saw what was waiting inside. Ships, hundreds of them, sealed in preservation bays, maintained by automated systems, waiting. Colony ships, terraforming equipment, genetic archives, everything humanity would need to start again. And mixed among them, the last warships of the Terran Defense Fleet. Walked through the station in a daze, followed by her crew and the captains of the other ships. They found the command center, still functioning, still waiting. And there, on a console that lit up its touch, was a recorded message. The face that appeared was that of a woman in her 50s, wearing the uniform of a Terran captain. Her eyes were tired but determined. "My name is," she said. "I am the captain of the Forlorn Hope. If you are seeing this message, then humanity has survived." Held her breath. "The hegemony wanted to erase us," Captain continued. "Our history, our culture, everything we were. They nearly succeeded, but we refused to give them everything. We hid our future here in the dark, and we trusted that someday someone would find it." The recording paused, and Captain seemed to look directly at. "Whoever you are, whatever brought you here, the choice is yours now. You can walk away. You can forget what you have seen and return to whatever life you had before, or you can bring us back. You can take these ships, these resources, these people, and you can build something new, something the hegemony cannot destroy." She smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "I am betting on you. Do not let me down." The recording ended. The command center was silent. Looked at the dozens of people who had gathered behind her, descendants of survivors, humans who had never known anything but hiding and fear. "Well," said quietly, "what do we do, Captain?" Before could answer, Aegis spoke. "I am detecting multiple hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system. Hegemony vessels, 12 capital ships, including 4 destroyers. They will arrive in approximately 6 hours." The moment of reflection was over. The choice had been made for them. "How many warships do we have?" asked. "In the preservation bays, 312 combat-capable vessels. However, they have been dormant for 40 years. Activation will take time." "How much time?" "At optimal efficiency, 4 hours." Nodded. She had not asked for this. She had not wanted to be a captain, a leader, a symbol. She had just been a cargo hauler who bought a broken ship for 7 credits because she had nothing left to lose. But here she was, and there was no one else. "Wake them up," she said. "Wake them all up." The next 4 hours were controlled chaos. The preserved warships activated one by one, their AIs waking from 40 years of sleep, their systems powering up for the first time since the war. Crews from the hidden fleet spread out to take command of the vessels that had no one to fly them. Found herself coordinating a battle plan with captains she had never met, on ships she had never seen, against an enemy that outnumbered them in everything except desperation. When the hegemony fleet arrived, they found something they had not expected. Not a damaged refugee ship running for its life, not a handful of scattered survivors. They found 300 human warships, arranged in battle formation, weapons charged and shields raised. At the head of the fleet was the Forlorn Hope. Commander Vex, the officer who had been hunting them since Theta 9, sent a message demanding their surrender. Did not bother to respond. She just gave the order. The Battle of the Hollow lasted 9 hours. The hegemony had superior numbers and more advanced technology. They had been the dominant power in the galaxy for half a century, undefeated and unchallenged. They had destroyed Earth and scattered humanity to the winds. But they had never faced humans who had nothing left to lose. The old Terran warships fought with a fury that the hegemony had forgotten. The AIs, loyal beyond death, coordinated their attacks with precision that no organic crew could match. And at the center of it all, the Forlorn Hope led charge after charge, its weapons blazing, its shields absorbing hit after hit. When it was over, Commander Vex's flagship was drifting wreckage. 8 of the 12 hegemony ships had been destroyed or disabled. The rest were retreating, limping back toward their borders with warnings that everything had changed. Stood on the bridge of the Forlorn Hope, surrounded by cheering crew members and the voices of captains celebrating over the communication channels. They had won. Against all odds, against everything the universe had thrown at them, they had won. Aegis displayed a galaxy map on the main screen. Hegemony territory was marked in red, vast, and imposing. But beyond it, the unexplored region stretched out in every direction, full of possibilities. Captain Aegis said, "I have a question." Smiled tiredly, "Go ahead." Was it a mistake, purchasing this ship for 7 credits? She thought about the station behind them, full of ships and supplies and the future of humanity. She thought about, reunited with his daughter. She thought about, and standing on the bridge of a warship, part of something bigger than themselves for the first time. She thought about Captain, who had bet everything on the hope that someone would come. "No," said, "it was the best 7 credits I ever spent." The forlorn hope turned toward the stars, and for the first time in 40 years, humanity set out to find a new home.